Hi, this is Kendra from Pencil and Pigment, and today I kind of wanted to have a little chat about the jelly gouache, that huge fad that's taken hold, and just have a discussion about that product and about gouache in general. What it is, what it does, what it looks like. And I thought I would just doodle a little tube I have. I don't own jelly gouache. I will probably never purchase it. I always buy the white because it's a really nice, for watercolors, it's a very bright, opaque white. And I'm not a traditional watercolorist in that I don't omit spaces to have white. I add my white later as a paint. So let's talk about those jelly gouaches. So Arctics and Hemi, they all make these jelly gouaches, and all that means is they come in those little tiny jelly cups that kind of look like a North American pudding cups to me. And it looks like Hemi started theirs in about July of 2018, and Arctics did theirs in about April of 2020. So they haven't been around like a super long time, but just long enough that everybody seems to have purchased them and gotten on that bandwagon of trying them and seeing what they're all about, because they are fairly affordable. For the 18 set, I believe it retails for less than 20 US American dollars. Now, I believe these are all, Magic Fly makes a set as well. I believe these are manufactured by the same company, so I believe this is a white labeling situation. And if you want to know what white labeling is, I will link to a video where I discuss that in depth. So the benefits of having your gouache in tubes is that this is a predictable consistency. Your gouache always needs to remain airtight so it can maintain the longest amount of shelf life. The average shelf life for gouache is about 2 years. I've heard it 2 to 5 years, but the average is about 2. So take that in comparison to, say, acrylic paints, on average about 10 years, or watercolor pans, if treated correctly, about 10 years. Oil paints you could get 40 years out of. So this has a very short shelf life. And for beginners, I would actually recommend tubes. There is a very predictable consistency that comes out of these because you know that it's always going to be still wet. When it dries out, when you have to start rehydrating it yourself, you're going to get inconsistency, and every time you go to do that, it's going to change it up a little bit. Thus, you're going to have to try and figure out which ratio of water to gouache you like and prefer, and it's just, for beginners, I would say that that can be a little discouraging. And one more thing that you shouldn't have to think about when trying a new art supply. So basically, gouache is just a water-based paint with a high pigment load and better opacity. So that's just the difference between gouache and watercolor. And like watercolor though, you can re-wet this, but it dries matte and opaque. So acrylic dries kind of shiny and can't be re-wet. Watercolor dries kind of translucent. Basically, the particle sizes are larger in gouache, and they use binders like gum arabic and dextrim, which is like the glue that holds it together. And they also use fillers like chalk or calcium chloride, and that gives it that heavier opaque consistency, and overall you get that better sort of flow with it. But I would recommend, like I recommend with all paints, that you swatch your gouache, because it does dry lighter than it appears in wet form. So if you're using those jelly cups and you're like, ooh, I really like that shade, that hue, that tint, and then you go to paint it, it's going to dry lighter. And it's more noticeable in gouache than it is in watercolor. So also with gouache, I would recommend using synthetic brushes over natural hair brushes. because synthetic brush bristles hold less water, and you can control the amount of water that goes into the paint. Yes, you can thin your gouache so it looks like a watercolor, but why would you when you have watercolors? I'm just saying. Anyways, it helps prevent the streakiness because you can get streaks very, very easily if your water to gouache ratio is off. So let's talk about these gouache cups. These gouache cups you can rehydrate. So if you've purchased a set of this and you've closed it up, you've put it on a shelf and you haven't used it for 2 months, you get it back out and all of a sudden they look really cracked and really dry, don't freak out. You can rehydrate them. I would recommend only using distilled water. If you use tap or spring water, they contain minerals and that will affect the clarity and you'll start, losing your color brilliance. So just like with watercolors, distilled water is also probably a better idea. So I would also recommend, because these have such a short shelf life, that you smell your gouache cups. Sniff them. Do they smell sour? Do they smell like rotten eggs? If they start to stink, they have gone moldy. And the mold starts to grow when these cups and gouache paint is exposed to oxygen. So you can add glycerin to your cups, a couple drops, and it acts like a preservative and it'll help sort of bring it back to life if they have dried out. If it smells moldy or it smells like eggs or it smells sour, add a couple drops of ammonia and that will kill the mold and smell. The other thing you can use to sort of maintain the longevity and shelf life of these cups would be to add honey. So honey actually produces hydrogen peroxide, and this fights mold and acts sort of as a cleaner. It adds a little texture and it makes it easier to spread, and it also helps to fight the dryness. So what I would recommend if you want to purchase the gouache in these gel cups would be, as you're opening them, have a jar of honey, have a little thing of glycerin, add a couple little drops of each to each cup. A little glycerin and a little honey. Just to try and get 5 years out of this instead of say 2. And also to keep it from cracking sooner and drying out. So you can maintain that sort of paint consistency so you don't always have to try and mix and keep it from getting streaky and getting weird. So you can add your honey to acrylic paint too to keep that also from molding. But high quality gouache paintings can last hundreds of years. The low quality is, I'm just gonna say it, these sort of jelly cup gouaches are more lower end quality, and you can tell because of the price. A lot of them don't contain pigment information. You can get, if you create something you absolutely love, you probably can get a good 15 years out of that piece of art. Stick it behind glass and frame it. If you love it, stick it behind glass and keep it from a window. If you don't have any frames or you don't like framing your art that you love, I would say spray it with a UV resistant varnish to extend the life. But I would also say spray all your gouache paintings when you're done anyway, just because water rehydrates them and a drop of water could ruin a piece of art, or just the general humidity in the air can wreck your art. So spray it with a UV resistant varnish and then do like an isolation coat to prevent it from yellowing. Or frame it, stick it behind a sheet of glass. So out of these brands of jelly gouache, it looks like Artex is the only one that has a little flyer or information sheet about pigment information. I looked at, it's their 18 set. 8 of those colors are hues. So there's a mixture of two different pigments within these cups. These are convenience colors. These aren't pure pigments. These are colors that are already created for you just to use right away. So you won't get a lot of mixing options and creations from mixing these cups together. They're meant just to kind of use from cup to paper. As a result, a lot of these colors are not light fast. Again, probably the purples. So what would you use this for? This would be great for sketchbooks, for print reproduction products, you know, scan it, photograph it, have it reproduced on sketchbooks, clothing, hats, stickers, whatever. These are great for students, great for children. They're really a budget product, but just keep in mind the shelf life, keep in mind with these cups that they can get moldy really quickly, but there's ways to combat that. This fad is very interesting. I see about 80% of the people that have posted it don't even use gouache, so when it goes bad, I just see them moving on to something else. If you're a gouache lover by heart, maybe give it a try. I don't know, or buy a couple tubes of primary colors and mix your own and see what else you can create with it. Acrylic gouache is interesting as well. It's waterproof once dry because it uses an acrylic-based binder. So that would be the difference between gouache and acrylic gouache. I hope this helps in some way. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you all tomorrow. Bye.